It's June 1944, and British and Canadian forces are taking part in Operation Overlord, the massive invasion of Nazi-occupied France. Their mission is to cross the English Channel and push inland, liberating the French people from German occupation. But their path forward is blocked by a heavily fortified city. It's going to take a long time to dislodge the enemy from these positions. So they have no choice but to launch an all-out assault. And as thousands of Allied troops go into battle, hundreds of German infantry and tank crews will be captured. The fight for Caen has begun. Today we talk about the summer of 1944. The streets of Caen became a deadly battlefield, where British and Canadian forces clashed with Germany's panzer divisions. This series covers important battles and operations from across the Second World War in greater depth than we can in our regular videos. In today's episode, we'll look at the hard-fought battle to capture the German-held city of Caen in northern France between June and July 1944. We'll see just what it took to capture this important city and how the fate of hundreds of German soldiers was sealed in the process. As the fighting continued around the beaches of Normandy, it soon became clear to the Allied commanders that the coastal road to Paris would be blocked until the city of Caen was captured. The city had been heavily fortified by the Germans, and the numerous defensive positions protecting the approaches were garrisoned by elite German troops, including several panzer divisions. It was a tough nut to crack and would be one of the longest and hardest-fought battles of the war. The British 3rd Infantry Division attacked west of the city on June, while the 2nd Canadian Infantry Division pushed up from the east. They were supported by tanks from the 6th, 7th, and 8th Armored Divisions, as well as artillery bombardments from the Royal Regiment of Canadian Artillery. There was heavy fighting in and around the city center, but by the end of the day, the Canadians had advanced nearly 2 miles towards Caen, while the British had made gains on their western flank. Despite having entered the city, neither side had made any real progress, and the casualties were mounting. It soon became clear that conventional tactics wouldn't work. The Germans were dug in too deep, and there were simply too many of them. In June, Lieutenant General Harry Crerar, commander of the Canadian First Army, spoke about the enemy's strength in a report to his superiors. He said, "The situation now is that we are fighting a very powerful and determined enemy who is making the defense of this area a matter of real prestige. He has brought into the defense large formations of tanks, self-propelled guns, artillery, and other arms, and is manning them with troops who are displaying both courage and tenacity." He also noted that German snipers and booby traps were causing heavy casualties. Each day, whole squads of Canadians were wiped out when they triggered hidden mines or walked into carefully concealed ambushes. To counter this, Canadian snipers and engineers were sent out to hunt down and defuse the mines and explosives. Meanwhile, on the British front, things were going almost as bad as the Canadians, though the British did at least manage to keep the city from falling into enemy hands. In June, the 3rd Infantry Division came under heavy attack from German tanks, so much so that Major General J.H.D. Stevenson, commanding the 3rd Division, thought they might have to abandon their positions around the city. Luckily, reinforcements arrived and managed to drive off the attackers. But while the defenders were holding on, the situation was getting increasingly desperate. In a dispatch from the London Gazette, Major E.G.M. Scott Moncrieff wrote, "On the 13th, the 7th Battalion was ordered to relieve the 2nd Battalion in the Wilder area. After dark, 2 companies of the 7th Battalion went forward. The advance was slow and difficult. The enemy put up fierce resistance, holding firm to building after building and street after street. Men and material were dropped to forward positions by gliders from number 29 and 34 Squadrons, RAF. The men displayed great tenacity, capturing building after building, consolidating each position with Lewis gun teams and light mortars. In the early hours of the 14th, the enemy launched a strong counterattack against the left flank. A party of tanks and infantry drove into our front line, blowing up one building and killing or wounding many of the defenders. The enemy infantry penetrated the town and established itself on the outskirts. As the light grew, it was seen that many buildings had been gutted by artillery fire and that the whole town was a mass of blown and shattered concrete. By 1700 hours on the 15th, all objectives on the Wilder front had been captured. Slowly but surely, the Canadians and British forces pushed deeper into the city, but they still hadn't managed to get through. The German defenses were simply too strong. But luckily, the elements were on the Allied side. Storms, high winds, and rain soaked through the defenders, ruining many of their supplies and equipment. It also made the ground extremely muddy, which played havoc with the German armored vehicles. The rains continued throughout the month of June, turning the streets of Caen into thick, brown sludge. And by mid-July, the wet, windy weather had forced both sides to spend more time inside fortifications. Even the men complained about being stuck in the miserable conditions. Private George Langford of the King's Own Scottish Borderers wrote home about the weather on July 1st. Weather here at present is just rotten. Heavy rainfalls every night and nearly every day. Mud is something awful. It's up to the axles of motor cars, and it's not uncommon to see lorries stuck up to their trailers. It's enough to make one's hair stand on end just thinking about it. By this point, both sides were suffering heavy losses. The fighting had reached a stalemate, and so it was decided that the only way to break through the city's defenses would be to outflank them. The British and Canadians would push southwards, crossing the Orne and Dives rivers, and pushing towards the German-held hills near the village of Carpiquet. If successful, this would cut off the main German supply routes and force those defending the city to retreat. And so it began. On July, the 4th Canadian Armored Division smashed into the German lines along the River Orne. Meanwhile, the British 6th Airborne Division secured a bridgehead across the river, and the rest of the Canadian 2nd Infantry Division drove the Germans back from the town of Falaise. Elsewhere, Canadian tanks and infantry seized bridges over the River Dives and pushed on to Viognes, less than 5 miles south of Caen. By the end of the day, Canadian forces had advanced 5 miles and were continuing their drive towards Carpiquet. But the Germans weren't finished yet. They still had one last trick left, a desperate gamble to turn the tide of battle. In July, German reinforcements launched a surprise counterattack, driving the Canadians back from Valais and forcing them to withdraw to a point just north of the village. Seeing that their comrades were in danger, Canadian artillery opened fire on the advancing Germans, causing them to break and run for cover. This gave the Canadians time to regroup and form a defensive perimeter around Val. Meanwhile, south of the city, elements of the British 7th Armored Division and the 8th Armored Divisions engaged German tanks and infantry. Heavy fighting continued throughout the day, but slowly the pressure began to ease and the Allied line stabilized. With their flanks secure, the Canadians and British pushed into Caen and mopping up operations began. Hundreds of German infantry and tank crews were taken as POWs. Many were caught in encirclements when entire panzer divisions were trapped and forced to surrender. Others threw away their weapons and surrendered after firing their last rounds and seeing their ammunition was expended. After more than 3 weeks of fighting, house to house, street to street, the battle for Caen was finally over. Though the exact number of POWs taken during the battle isn't known, it is estimated that somewhere around 300 German soldiers were captured during the fighting. For their actions during this battle, Captain Frederick William Hill and Trooper Harry Robert Street were awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. In the London Gazette announcing their awards, their bravery was described. Captain Hill was praised for showing great gallantry when he repeatedly refused assistance until all wounded soldiers under his command had been attended to. And Trooper Street was commended for saving the life of a fellow soldier at the risk of his own life. With the road to Paris clear, the Allies pressed on toward Falaise, beginning the long process of clearing Western Europe of German troops. The Battle of Caen was a turning point in the Normandy campaign, proving that determination and strategy could overcome even the most formidable panzer divisions. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe for more and leave your thoughts and comments below. Thanks for watching.